Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Axient Digital Top 10 Question Stream. I'm Wes Pitzer. I'm the Pro and Retail Territory Manager for North Texas and Oklahoma. I have Clayton Mills, who's the Systems Territory Manager for North Texas. And from Shure, we have Sam Bisick, Pro Audio Sales Manager for the Western U.S. We're going to be answering some questions, some of the top 10 questions that we had about Axient Digital. We're going to do this pretty informally, where we just answer some questions and kind of do a roundtable kind of thing. So let's go ahead and jump into it. First question that most people ask is, what's the difference between Axient Digital ADX and ADX FD? Sam, you want to kind of hit that one?
Yeah, sure. I can start anyway. This is it's always a fun one to do. We like to, at least internally, and when I'm talking about it with customers, I like to describe it as a choose your own adventure of wireless microphone transmitters. So when you start thinking about Axient Digital, we have three different types of transmitters that you can use. First and foremost, we have our AD series, and AD is going to function like pretty much every Shure wireless system you've used before. With Axient Digital being our current high-tier wireless, that would be our suggested upgrade path from the now discontinued analog UHFR to move into digital. It's going to operate very similarly, and you don't get some of the extra bells and whistles that you get with the other transmitters. So your next step up from AD is the ADX series. And the important thing to remember is that basically the X is the enhanced version. So when you have ADX series, that's when you start to incorporate ShowLink into the transmitters. And ShowLink is our proprietary technology that allows that two-way communication between transmitter and receiver. So that's when you start to get into some of those fun features, like being able to remotely control the transmitter from either the receiver front panel or from wireless workbench. And with a couple of the auxiliary pieces, you also get into the interference detection and avoidance. And that's only available with the ADX series transmitters. Since you don't have that two-way communication with AD, you can't get that ShowLink capability. And then the last and the most kind of supercharged transmitter, if you will, is this ADX FD. And that FD stands for frequency diversity. Now, just due to physical real estate, FD is only available on a handheld transmitter. We just couldn't pack that much radio into a body pack and still keep it a reasonable size that people would want to wear. But what's happening in the FD handhelds is you're actually transmitting on two separate frequencies. And this is your money mic, your absolutely cannot fail mic, your national anthem before a sporting event, your Super Bowl halftime show, your CEO of whatever major corporation, absolutely cannot fail. And so between transmitting on two separate frequencies and having that ShowLink capability, that's where if your mic takes a hit, the receiver can see that interference coming, intelligently switch to the other frequency, dish out a new frequency to frequency 1 in your handheld, and make sure that while all of that is happening in a fraction of a second, you never have any drop in audio. So like I said, it's a choose your own adventure kind of thing, but it also allows you to kind of build as you get into the Axient Digital ecosystem. Maybe you don't need an FD handheld yet, but you might down the road, and you can always add on later. Did I miss anything that you guys want to add in there?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that the receiver stays the same, and it can work with any type of transmitter. And you can even mix and match ADX and AD transmitters on the same receiver. Additionally, if you want the frequency diversity functionality, like Sam was saying, they just couldn't pack that much, transmitter processing into a body pack, but you can use two ADX body packs in frequency diversity mode. And actually you can use two AD body packs, and even with ULX Digital, you can do it with two ULX Digital body packs. You can use them in a frequency diversity mode. You just don't have the feature set of the automatic, interference detection and avoidance that you have with ADX if you use an AD transmitter or a ULX Digital transmitter.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah. That kind of leads into the next question. And what do I need to set up a system with interference detection and avoidance? Clayton, you kind of touched on that for a second, not being available on the ULXD. and Axient Digital has that available. So you want to touch base on that a little bit?
So you've got to have an ADX transmitter in order to take advantage of the features of interference detection and avoidance. And there's two other hardware pieces. Sam mentioned the ShowLink access point. That's the piece that provides a two-way communication between the networked Axient receivers and the transmitters. So you do have to have the ShowLink access point. You also need the spectrum manager. So the Axient digital receivers are the part of the hardware system that actually detect interference. But in order to change frequencies, you need the spectrum manager, which is constantly scanning the spectrum and measuring the pre-calculated list of backup frequencies to know which frequencies are clean when it needs to initiate a change. So you have to have the access point, and you also have to have the spectrum manager with your ADX transmitters in order to have the interference detection and avoidance feature set.
Cool. All right. So we talked a little bit about, Sam talked a little bit about the ADX-FD, the frequency diversity handheld. And the next question is, how do we set up for frequency diversity? From the receiver side, I can say that it's a simple step-by-step going through the menu and setting it up, because all of, as we talked about, all of the receivers, it's the same receiver. The only difference is which handheld or body pack, which transmitter you have available. So from a receiver side, it's really simple. You just go in and set it to frequency diversity in there. There's a couple of things that you have to think about when you're doing frequency diversity. Remember, you've got two radios there that are going on. So you're going to end up using two channels to have that frequency diversity happening there. So in a quad, for example, you could set up 1 and 2 to be your frequency diversity channels for them to bounce back and forth between those two. Also be aware that you can do frequency diversity without a frequency diversity handheld. If you want to use a body pack, you can use two ADX body packs to achieve the same thing. It's just you're using two radios at the same time. Anybody else want to add something to that?
Yeah, just to tack onto that a little bit. I think one of the a nice thing to touch on anyway when it comes to frequency diversity, kind of like Clayton was mentioning with the single platform receiver, is you do have the ability to use both frequency diversity transmitters and non-frequency diversity transmitters at the same time. So if you have a quad receiver, you have your money mic that needs to be on two channels. Channels 1 and 2 could be for that frequency diversity mic, but channels 3 and 4 can still be running regular AD series transmitters. It's not across the entire platform. It's within the channel submenu. So it's not the hardware of the entire receiver, but it's those particular channels you're using for the frequency diversity purpose.
Yeah, good point. Good point there.
Good thing to note too is you can set that up from the receiver itself. You can also access that if you're connected on Wireless Workbench. So you can pull up in your monitor window the settings. You can actually make the changes to the receiver over the network as well. So there's more than one way to actually access those settings.
Yeah, very good.
Absolutely.
The next question is, how do I set up a frequency diversity system with body packs? I touched on that a little bit a minute ago, but it's really just using two ADX body packs and a Y cable available from Shure for your lavalier. It's pretty simple and straightforward there. There's not a whole lot more to it other than what we went over for the frequency diversity, I think. Yep. You guys have anything else on that?
The only thing to note is it really just becomes a different setting in that receiver when Workbench when you're putting it into frequency diversity. As you navigate through the menu, you'll see you actually have two options, selection or combining. Selection is for the body packs. You're using two separate physical transmitters. So it's selecting which transmitter has a good signal right now. Combining is when you have FD, since both of those transmits are coming out of a single handheld transmitter, the receiver can kind of combine both of those signals together and pick the best parts of each one as it's doing its frequency diversity.
Cool. Here's one that comes up from time to time. Can I see potential interference without a spectrum manager? Anybody?
The answer is yes. So the Axient digital receiver is what actually, detects the interference and will give you a warning both on the front of the receiver. And if you're connected and monitoring from Shure channels or wireless workbench, you'll see that message as well that you are detecting interference. And actually, a Ulix digital receiver will do the same thing. However, without the spectrum manager and the access point and ADX transmitters, you will not necessarily be able to change frequencies either manually or automatically. I think that's in one of the other questions, but it's actually the receiver that detects the interference.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if you guys will just bear with me here for a moment, I actually have a good slide that I'm going to throw up and share out there right now. Wes and Clayton, can you guys see this? Just verify real quick. So this just kind of walks through what the workflow is when you're getting a new frequency. So as Clayton mentioned, that receiver is the one that's detecting the interference. When you have all the pieces and you're doing the full avoidance, detection and avoidance, like Clayton said, the receiver actually sees it, and then it basically sends a request to the spectrum manager who's holding that pool of pre-coordinated backup frequencies saying, hey, I've got a bad one. Can you send me a new frequency? The AXT600 pushes that frequency to the receiver, and then the receiver and the transmitter jump at the same time to a new frequency. So that took me a good 30 seconds here to explain, but all of that is happening in a fraction of a second. But that being said, if you don't want all of this bottom stuff, if you're not using ShowLink, you can absolutely still get that warning on the receiver screen with a setting in the submenus.
Cool, cool. Let's see. Next question. I don't want the system switching frequencies on its own. Can I do this manually? I have definitely heard this from some of the more old school guys that just don't want, a piece of gear doing something for them. The answer to that question is obviously yes. You can set it up to either do it on its own or manually whenever that way you can decide how you want it to go. It's, again, a very easy walkthrough in the menu on the receiver side. It's very easy to set up how your interference management is handled.
Yeah. So just some kind of fun backstory here with this particular question. When we initially launched Axient and we introduced this frequency detection and avoidance feature, there was not a manual option. It was only an automatic feature. You turn it on, the system detects interference, it pushes out a new frequency. You as the tech, the monitor engineer, the front of house engineer, whoever, you don't touch anything, you never push anything. And as Wes said, we got a lot of feedback from the field that said, I don't know how I feel about that. I really don't want the system changing frequencies on its own, even if I've pre-coordinated and I know they're good, I'm not comfortable with that. So it was actually a firmware update where we introduced the option for a manual change. So as Wes said, your receiver can alert you, and it'll basically, one of the soft key buttons there on the menu says, do you want to push out a new frequency? You hit the button to say yes. Or it can be automatic. It'll alert you, it'll change, and it'll be good to go. And then what we found after the fact, when we introduced that firmware update and allowed people the option to manually change, after they did it a couple times manually, they changed it back to the automatic setting anyways, because they quickly realized this thing can detect a frequency, request a new one, and send it out to transmitter and receiver way faster than I can even realize that there is a problem. So when you have it on automatic, by the time you hear something and look at your rack to see what's going on, it's already changed, problem is gone, it's been solved. So it happens so much faster on that automatic setting than it would with manual intervention. But if you really want to have that full control over your system, you absolutely still have it.
All right. What about ADX batteries? Do you have to buy those separately? What's the life on them? What do I need to charge them? Clayton, you wanna run through those? That's actually like 3 questions, but
Sure. Well, we get a lot of questions about rechargeable batteries in the Axient Digital series. So first of all, the AD transmitters have the option of using the SB900A rechargeable lithium-ion battery that also works with Ulix Digital, QLix Digital, the 300, 900, and 1000 PSM systems as well. But they'll run on alkaline. So that's one place of confusion for a lot of people. Is AD transmitters come with alkaline. You have to buy the rechargeable SB900A separately for those. The ADX transmitters only work with a rechargeable lithium ion battery that is provided with the transmitter. In fact, you get 2 of them when you buy the transmitter. Where you get a little confusion there is that the ADX body pack has one type of battery, the ADX2 and ADX2 frequency diversity handhelds have another type of battery, and then the ADX1 micro pack also has a different type of battery as well. All of those require different chargers or charging bays. If you're using like the SBRC rack mount charging system, for example, you have to buy the 2-bay modules for the different ADX transmitter batteries. And the same thing with some of the drop-in chargers and the charging tray. For example, the battery that comes with the ADX1M micro pack has a charging tray that will only charge its batteries. So it's very important to pay attention to that. But they do come with 2 batteries each. The idea being you can always have one in the transmitter and one charging if you'd like. Sam's bringing up a nice slide here on a screen that he's sharing that shows the different chargers. So you've got the rack mount SBRC up there, which you can buy 2-bay charging modules for the ADX handheld, the ADX body pack, the ADX1M micro pack, and for the SB900A batteries. So you can kind of choose your own adventure, as Sam likes to say, with those. Then you're looking at the SBC 240, which is very popular for the ADX1 and ADX2 as a drop-in charger. It makes it easy for talent to grab the microphone transmitter and use it and just quickly bring it back when they're exiting or leaving the performance area. The SBC 840 will fit the ADX1 or ADX2 batteries, but it's a lay-in charger. And then the 840M is just for the ADX1M micro pack. To note, all of these are networkable. So when you do have them on a network and you're using a wireless workbench, you can actually monitor the battery statistics while they're charging, which is a really nice feature set as well. I think there was more to that question too.
What's the life on the batteries? That was one of the questions.
Got it. Well, I can take that one. I was going to add a quick note about the batteries and the chargers and chargeability as well, since we're on it. Specifically related to the micro packs, as Clayton mentioned, you have the option for the lay-in battery chargers, the docking chargers, or the SBRC. But I do just want to note for those micro body packs, because of the way they were designed to be a little bit more water resistant than some of our other products, they don't actually have any external contacts. So they do not have an option to dock the way an AD1, ADX1, or handheld transmitters do. They do either the batteries need to be removed in order to be charged, and will have to either be put into the rack mount charger or put into the slot-in charger. And that was just so that we could seal that pack up a little bit more and make it a little more water resistant. Regarding battery life, that can be a bit of a tricky question to answer, just because there are a lot of environmental factors that can come into play with batteries. But generally speaking, the batteries themselves, all the batteries we make are intelligent batteries. That means that they have a little chip inside of them that's going to keep track of how hot that battery is, how many life cycles it has, what the life of the battery is, the charge of the battery. So typically what we say is after about 500 cycles, the battery is going to be shown about 80% health. Now, a cycle means one full discharge of the battery and one complete recharge of that battery. So if you've got a battery that's going to run for 8 hours and you use it for 4 hours and charge it back up, that's only half a cycle. You'd have to do that twice before you go through one full cycle. And then once you hit that 500 times, then that battery is at about 80% health. And when you hit that 80% health mark, that's where we suggest that you take a look at it and determine on your own whether or not that runtime is still acceptable for your application, or if it's time to start looking at replacing those batteries.
All right. Let's see. Is it recommended to scan or coordinate from the hardware or from wireless workbench? I can say that it's more of a personal preference thing from my standpoint. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. I will say if you are first time setting up an Axient digital or ADX system using the Spectrum Manager. There is a wizard on the front of it that makes it super easy to find frequencies, deploy everything. I think it's literally like 3 button pushes, from the front panel, and you're done, maybe 4. But it's super easy. Wireless Workbench gives you more information that you can pay attention to for me. But as far as which one's better, really, I think it's more personal preference. You guys think that one's better than the other one?
No, I think it's. Go ahead, Sam.
Go ahead, Clay. I was just going to say, I don't think one is better than the other. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. What it comes down to is personal preference. The only thing I really have to add is it doesn't really matter whether you do it on the hardware or do it in Workbench. The important thing is run a scan and coordinate your frequencies.
Absolutely.
I would say that the advantage to using Workbench is if you have other non-Axient digital wireless microphone and IMs in your event that you want to coordinate for as well. It does provide the manner to get everything working together. Typically, if you're using Axient digital, you're probably going to have in-ear monitor transmitters and possibly other types of wireless microphones in use as well. It allows you to be FCC compliant and avoid the TV stations that are on air. Even if the receiver is measuring the signal strength of those TV stations, at a low enough level that it'll place frequencies there. It's at least nice to be able to see what's actually going on in your environment. And that graphical representation of the scan and Wireless Workbench is, really, you can kind of see what happened and not just, taken for granted that the Axient digital receiver is doing what it's going to do, which it does well. So,
okay, I'd like to change my answer. Good job, Clayton.
I use Wireless Workbench for everything. So that's my personal preference, though.
Yeah, to be fair, that's most of the time what I'm using as well. I do find the hardware, if there's not a bunch, like you said, a bunch of other things going on that you need to coordinate, the hardware is very easy for somebody who doesn't know how to necessarily do a coordination to, like I said, just push a couple of buttons in it and it coordinates everything and does everything it's supposed to. So, but yeah, I agree with your points on Wireless Workbench for sure. Okay, what's the difference in transmit power? What is preferred, standard versus high density? Anybody?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would clarify what we're talking about when we say transmit power, because we do mention standard and high density mode here, which does affect transmit power, but it's not necessarily the same thing. But the differences in transmit power, each of our transmitters have variable output transmit powers from 2 milliwatts up to some all the way up to 50 milliwatts. It's going to vary depending on transmitter and of course where you are in the world and what's legally allowed. But generally speaking, we have a low, we have a standard, and we have a high. More often than not, standard is going to be just fine. It's the way every transmitter ships out of the factory. And most of the time, that's going to be okay. High power, you might want to go to if you're in a particularly large area. You need to make your signal more robust. Maybe for a main performer who, again, you want to have that robust signal. Everyone else can be on standard. They might be on high power. There's kind of a wide variety of reasons you might change that. Low power, you might go to if you have a lot of frequencies you need to get on air, and physically speaking, you're in a relatively confined space. Maybe you're in a ballroom that's got a bunch of air walls and you have a whole bunch of breakout meetings going on and you need a bunch of mics, or you're outdoor at an event or a festival and it's outdoor. It's a tough RF city like LA or New York or Chicago, and you need to get a ton of mics on air along with IEMs and comms and everything else. But the space that those are going to be used in is that stage. It's relatively small. You can reuse frequencies in another part of the park or whatever. So that's when you might drop down that transmit power because it's not going to go very far, but you need to get a lot of frequencies on there. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good point on the difference between as far as transmit power, and we didn't really go over the standard versus high density difference there. But before we get into that, I would like to say that I've run across a lot of situations when doing a coordination where guys tend to think of power as like a volume knob. I'm getting dropouts, so let me crank that power up. So I'm getting more volume out of it, and it's really not like that. I like to point, my analogy is it's more like a flashlight. You know, if you shoot the bigger that, more powerful that beam is, it's going to go further and further away from where the source you're trying to light up is. So that people tend to think of that in a different way. So in a lot of cases, if you've got antennas right on the side of the stage and you're 25 feet from your transmitter, you don't need to hit it with 50 milliwatts of power from that far away. Maybe low power might be a better way to go, and you can fit more in there and keep that noise floor down. So Clayton, you want to touch on the standard versus high density thing again for the second time today?
Along those notes, just to kind of comment on that, you're right. A lot of people think the higher the power, the better. One problem with higher power transmitters, especially a lot of them, is you'll increase your intermod products. Now, Axient digital transmission signal is very linear and doesn't, create intermods in the same way that analog wireless at a high power will do it. But if you have a lot of digital transmitters at a high power, close proximity together, you will exaggerate that and create more problems for yourself. A lot of the real experts or gurus in our field today on RF will tell you that really you want to use the lowest transmit power that you can safely. So like in Sam's example, if you're doing a festival stage and there's 4 or 5 stages in this festival, chances are the transmitter on one particular stage is going to be within 100 feet of the receiving antenna. You might even go to low mode just so you keep that transmit power from, leading over to the other areas. And it helps with channel-to-channel spacing and some stuff like that. The difference between standard density mode and high density mode in both Axient Digital and Ulix Digital is really how many systems we can fit into a TV channel. So in standard density mode, we average about 17 wireless microphone systems in an empty 6 megahertz channel. In high density mode, we can actually take it up to about 47, which is a pretty remarkable number. And one of the things that it does is it actually drops the transmit power down to that low mode. So if you are using high density mode, you are confined to the lowest transmit power mode. Once again, like Sam talked about though, typically you're only going to go into that if you need a lot of channels in a very dense RF environment with a lot of microphones, comms, and in-ear monitor transmitters. And you really just want to make sure that your antenna system is close enough and properly configured that you can stay within the range of that while using the high density mode. So by dropping the transmit power and the bandwidth of the transmission signal, we can pack a lot more wireless systems into a much tighter space in high density mode.
Mm-hmm. Clayton, you hit on a good point there too, just to kind of throw it out there. A question that comes up not all the time, but often enough in the field and to our tech support team is my transmitter stuck in low power mode. What's going on? Why can't I do it? So especially in particular, if you're using ULXD or Axient Digital and you find transmitters that are stuck in that 2 milliwatt low power mode, double check to see if you're in high density mode or standard mode. More often than not, that's the issue. And then once you reset it, you're good to go.
Mm-hmm. Good point there. Okay, next question. What is quadversity? Sam, you want to give us a little rundown on that?
Yeah, so this is a good one. Let me go ahead and share my screen here real quick so we can see the backside of a quad receiver here. So quadversity is something that we introduced with Axient Digital. And as you can see here on the back panel, you have both an A/B antenna input, and then you have your cascade ports underneath. There's nothing new or groundbreaking there that are antennas C and D. What quadversity does is it's a hardware setting you can change in the receiver itself that makes these 2 additional antenna inputs. Much like frequency diversity, it's worth keeping in mind that this does half your channel count. So this is only available on quad receivers. It's not available on a dual receiver for just that reason. But it takes a quad receiver and makes it a 2-channel receiver. So channel 1 becomes your antennas A and B for frequency 1, and channel 2 becomes antennas C and D for frequency 1. But what it does is it really just helps make your RF performance that much more robust. So we've seen it used in a lot of different ways. Again, one might be a stage, an A stage with a B stage or a long thrust, and you need to make sure that you've got a lot of coverage there. It could just be that you want to make that RF more robust. You want to make sure it doesn't fail. So you've got a standard size stage, but you're dropping antennas at each corner and helping to make sure you're reducing any reflections or, any confusion in the system itself. I'm going to stop sharing that. You guys want to add more to that?
That's a great description of it, Sam. I would say it's probably more useful in production environments where you're moving from location to location. If you're doing an installed system with Axient Digital, you can use multiple antenna and antenna combining to create multi-zone areas for the same receiver. So we do that a lot in divisible combinable hotel spaces, casinos, houses of worship, or anywhere where they want to take a single transmitter and move from room to room. You can actually do that with physically installed antenna, but in a production or event scenario where you're setting up the day before, the day of, you don't have that option. It does give you the ability to kind of create that multi-zone area, but it also, as Sam mentioned, just really makes it a rock solid RF signal. When you're bringing in 4 antenna streams simultaneously and you're doing error bit correction between all 4, I mean, it exponentially decreases the chances of having any kind of dropout. So for your mission critical microphone, the Super Bowl singer in quad versity mode is a fabulous piece of technology. Not available on the dual channel Axient digital receiver, obviously.
And just to add on to what you were saying there, Clayton, when we're talking about, mission critical mics and mics that can't fail, when you're in that kind of situation, that's where you might take your AD receiver, your quad receiver, and put it in both quad versity mode and frequency diversity mode. And this is where you take a 4-channel receiver and make it a super powerful 1-channel receiver. But that is when you get your, like Clayton was saying, mission critical, absolutely cannot fail mic. That's what those feature sets are really for. When you find yourself in that situation and you need something where audio just cannot go down under any circumstances, quad versity and frequency diversity are the two tools within Axient Digital that really allow you to make sure you've got your show covered. You're going to be good. That audio is going to be there.
Yeah, the Uber wireless. That's a huge piece.
Yeah.
Okay, and last thing that I have on this list here, and after we're done with this, anybody that's on the stream, if you want to pop some questions into the chat, if you have some other questions about this, we have a few minutes to kind of take a look at those. The last question I have is, how can I use the timeline with a transmitter to do a walk test? Clayton, I know you've done some of this.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite features about Axient Digital. So I spent a lot of years as a monitor engineer and front of house engineer, mostly monitors, having to set up wireless microphone systems where it was just really a lot of guesswork. You would do a walk test, walk around, check, 1, 2, walk all around the venue and the stage, and hope that you had the ability to detect where you might have a potential dropout area due to antenna placement or multipath interference or something like that is kind of invisible. So there's a couple of great feature sets with Axient Digital. If you're using it with Wireless Workbench, you can run what's called a timeline plot, where you can see all the statistics of the transmitter. It's RF signal strength, audio quality. If you're doing that, you can see the channel quality metric, the battery statistics. You get all that information in a timeline plot. But with an AD transmitter or ADX transmitter, in the utility menu, you actually have something called a marker, which allows you to use the enter button on the transmitter to drop reference points. So when you're running that timeline and you're walking around the performance area, you can drop markers in mission critical places like the center of the stage or the pulpit, or as you're walking back to the green room area, drop one so you kind of know where you're at within that. There's also a really great tool. You can actually run a test tone. I think it's at what, 400 hertz or 1K.
Yep.
I usually use the 400 hertz one that's a little softer. But that's also if you're by yourself and you're doing a walk test, you can just throw up that test tone and run it through your PA system or the in-ear monitor receiver and just walk the venue. You don't have to sit there and try to talk in the microphone and hope that you are talking when you actually get a drop. It allows for a consistent audio signal. And that's a fantastic tool that I wish had been available to me when I was professionally working in venues as a monitor engineer and front of house engineer.
Yeah, I think you covered it all. You hit the nail on the head there. It's a great tool. And like Clayton said, as you walk around, when you're working by yourself like that, the one tricky part is just to remember where you walked, right? Because you can rename those markers in Workbench, but then you actually have to be at the computer at Workbench to rename them in real time. So they'll all just be named marker as you're walking around. But as long as you remember the path you took, it's such a great way to go back and see exactly where those RF dips are, where audio dropouts might be. And you can put a big red X of tape on the floor and then tell your talent, don't stand there. And then when they get mad at you because something dropped, you can say, well, you stood on the X. I told you not to stand there.
Yeah, that works great for the person paying your paycheck there. But
okay, maybe not that one, but at least you know.
Yeah, at least you know. All right, well, that's all the questions that I have. I'm looking at the chat here, and I'm not really seeing much of anything in there. So,
I have a question.
All right, shoot.
Okay, so when should I deploy multiple ShowLink access points?
Good question. So each ShowLink access point can connect to up to 24 transmitters. You would need to deploy multiples if you're going to have 25 or more transmitters, ADX series transmitters, or if you're trying to cover a large area. A ShowLink access point can cover close to the same distance as a transmitter. It's a little bit less, transmitters, we say about 100 meters, 300 feet. From a ShowLink access point, you're probably going to get closer to about 150 to 200 feet. So if you're covering a space that's that big and you need ShowLink coverage in the entire area, that's when you'd want to deploy multiples, or if you get above that 24 transmitter threshold.
I get that question a lot, is why I asked it. Also, a lot of people will put them in the green room area or whatever back of house area where transmitters are coming on and off, and they want to be able to monitor that transmitter as it's coming and going from the performance area. So that's another place where sometimes they'll get put.
Yeah, and you can also see the health of the signal again in the timeline with the ShowLink access point, and you can drop markers and all the same thing with the ShowLink that you can with the actual RF signal. So a really easy way again to tell, am I getting coverage here for that access point? All right, good stuff. Well, I don't see any questions, so I guess we are good to go here. I want to thank you guys for
all the questions for everybody. We did such a great job.
I know. Well, I appreciate Sam coming on here, Clayton. You guys have been very helpful on this. And remember, everybody out there watching this, to subscribe to the channel for more content. Make sure you hit the like button there. We appreciate you guys watching this, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.